Hello there, math magicians. Here we go with another lesson. This is going to be, so let's jot down some notes so that you can go back and look things up. This is lesson 10.2. So that's what section it is out of your note or out of your textbook. And the topic is solving square root functions. Solving square root functions. Okay? Alright. Now square root functions are the type where the x is under the radical. Okay? That's a square root function if the actual variable x is underneath the radical. So when you see that, and you're supposed to, when you're being asked to solve, you'll follow these steps. Alright, so these are the basic steps that you need to follow. Step number 1, isolate the radical on one side of the equation. Isolate the radical on one side. Isolate the radical on one side. Step 2, square both sides of the equation. Square both sides, the right side of the equal sign and the left side of the equal sign. Square both sides. Number 3, after you square both sides, you might have to do some other solving. It might actually involve factoring. Okay, so continue to solve. You might even have to factor. So it depends on the problem, but you might have to factor. And then the 4th step, check for extraneous roots. Check for extraneous roots. All right, once in a while you get a solution that actually doesn't work. Okay, so here we go. Isolate the radical on one side. Square both sides. Continue to solve. It might involve factoring. And then check for extraneous roots. All right, so those are the steps we're going to follow. All right, let's try 3 examples. All right, so here is the first example. We might do 4 examples. All right, let's see how it goes. So here's number 1. If you have the square root of x minus 5, and that's under the radical, and then plus 7 is out of the radical, equals 12. All right, this is a square root function. The first thing I have to do is isolate the radical. I have to get the radical alone on one side. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. I'm going to get rid of this add 7. I'm going to subtract 7. That will give me square root of x minus 5 equals 12 minus 7 is 5. So I just subtracted 7 from both sides. All right, the radicals alone. Next, I'm going to square both sides. I'm going to square both sides. Now, when you square a square root, what you'll end up with is just the radicand. All right? So think about it. If I had, square root of 4 times the square root of 4, that would give me the square root of 16, which is 4. So when you square a radical, square root of 4 times the square root of 4, it just ends up giving you 4. So when you square a radical, a square root, when you square a square root, it gets rid of the square root and leaves you with just the radicand. Now on the other side you'd have 25. because 5 squared is 25. And then you continue solving. To get x alone, you would add 5 to both sides, right? To get rid of a minus 5, you'd add 5. And you'd get x equals 30. And then don't forget, it's very important that you check. So take the 30, plug it in. 30 minus 5 is 25. Square root of 25 is 5. Plus 7 is 12. So it works. So that's a check. All right, let's try another one. Okay, number 2. Let's say you have the square root of 6 minus x, and that equals x. Okay, the first step is get the radical alone. Isolate the radical. All right, well, that's already alone. The radical is already alone on one side. Next step, square both sides. Okay, and the nifty thing about that is when you square a square root, you end up getting rid of the radical. All right, and so all you'll be left with is the radicand. So squaring a square root, that's square root, the opposite of a square root is squaring. So to get rid of a square root, you square it. All right, okay, on the other side, x squared. Okay, this has an x squared. This is a quadratic now. So get everything on one side and set it equal to 0. So I'm going to keep the x squared. To move a minus x, I'm going to add x to both sides. And to move this 6, to get rid of this 6 over here, I'm going to have to subtract 6 from both sides. Set it equal to 0. And now I can factor. Okay, this has a leading coefficient of 1. So I just need to use the x trick. What multiplies to negative 6 and adds up to 1? Multiplies to negative 6 and adds up to 1. I think that's 3 and negative 2. 3 and negative 2. So that'll be x plus 3 and x minus 2. And since we're multiplying here and the product is 0, I can use the 0 product property. So x will either equal negative 3 or 2. And then you check them, all right? So let's take and check negative 3. Plug it right back in here, negative 3. So 6 minus negative 3. 6 minus negative 3, that's 6 plus 3, that's 9. Square root of 9 is 3. And this would be negative 3? Wait, this answer would not give us, this answer was 3, and this x is negative. It doesn't work. That's an extraneous root. Now let's try 2. 6 minus 2 is 4. Square root of 4 is 2. And 2, yep, that one works. So your solution is x equals 2. And when you plug them in, you're plugging them into the original equation. Okay? All right, we'll try one more. All right, this is our last one. Again, you can go back and re-watch anything. You can pause the video, rewind it if you have questions. Okay, I have to get the radical alone. This time there are 2 radicals. So get one of them alone on one side. So let's move this one to the other side. So instead of minus, we're going to add. So I have the square root of 4x minus 3 equals the square root of x. I just added it to both sides. Okay, my radical is isolated. To get rid of a square root, the opposite of a square root is squaring. When you square both sides, you're getting rid of the square root. And you're left with just the radicand. And now this is linear. So get all the x's on one side. Let's subtract 4x. Subtract 4x from 1x. Subtracting 4x from 1x, 1x minus the 4x would be negative 3x. And then divide both sides by negative 3, and you'll get x equals 1. And then you plug it back into the original equation. Plug in 1. 4 times 1 is 4, minus 3. 4 minus 3 is 1. Square root of 1 is 1, minus the square root of 1. So 1 minus 1, yep, equals 0. All right, I hope this is helpful. If it's not, go back and re-watch it or ask me a question. Good luck.